Hey everybody, I'm Michelle with Next Chapter Counseling. The question I'm going to be answering today is how can you tell the difference between a red flag in a relationship and a flaw? So, this is a really important question to ask because it's a universal one, I think. Every single person on this planet has flaws. Therefore, whoever we are in a relationship with, that person is going to have flaws. How can we tell though when it crosses the line from a flaw to a red flag? How do you differentiate between those two? And how do you decide whether you want to stay in this relationship with what may be going on with your partner's flaws? And again, like how to tell if it's crossed the line, so to speak. So I'm going to give my 2 cents on this. Other people out there may have different opinions or different definitions of how you tell the difference between a red flag versus a flaw. So take in what my thoughts are and see if they apply to you. But I'm going to get into first what I would classify as red flags. So there are some red flags out there that I would say are pretty non-negotiable. The first being if there is abuse present in a relationship. I'm not going to get too in-depth in this video about what abuse is, but I highly recommend if you want to learn more information about the different types of abuse and how to differentiate between abusive and non-abusive behaviors that you go to thehotline.org. That's the website for the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And on their website, they have tons of information about what abuse is. So if you have any kind of inkling or suspicion that the way that your partner is treating you is abusive in nature, I highly recommend checking out that website because it will give you a lot of information. And again, there's lots of different types of abuse. Some are pretty obvious, like physical abuse. Other types of abuse are more subtle, like financial abuse or emotional abuse. So, if you have any gut feeling that you're experiencing abuse in your relationship, chances are you are. And it can sometimes feel good to get some reinforcement or to get some information that lets you know that that is indeed abuse. And if there is any abuse present in your relationship, yes, it is a red flag. The other thing that I think is important to acknowledge about abuse is that a lot of times in relationships early on, there isn't abuse present. The relationship might look very healthy, and then abuse comes in down the line, which can make it very hard to acknowledge that that's what it is because you had so much positive memories prior, so many positive memories prior to the abuse happening. So it makes it hard to come to terms with it. If you do realize, though, that any abuse is present in your relationship, it is a red flag. So that would be the first red flag that I would define. And the second I would classify as a red flag is addiction. So I'll talk about this a little bit with the flaw part of things, because if you're in a relationship with somebody who is in recovery or actively working on becoming sober and you're seeing positive steps in that direction, then this wouldn't be as much of a red flag. I really only consider addiction a red flag if it's not being treated or worked on in any way. If your partner is in denial that they have an addiction, they don't see that they have anything to work on. But again, if your gut is telling you this looks or feels like addiction to me, then that is a red flag in your relationship. And again, that addiction could be, drugs, alcohol, gambling, porn. It could be any variety of things or behaviors. But if you are sensing that your partner has some struggles going on with a type of addiction, at some point, this will impact your relationship negatively unless they eventually choose to get help for themselves. So, this is a red flag if there's untreated addiction going on in your relationship. And then the final type of red flag that I would talk about, which is a little more subjective compared to the first two that I mentioned, but if you start to notice any major value differences between you and your partner. I talked about this in a previous video that I recorded a little while ago that talked about some of the things that it's really important to have in common with your partner, for your relationship to be successful, you want to make sure that you and your partner are on the same path. So if you realize that you guys have some major differences, this does not mean that your partner is a bad person at all necessarily. It just means that it could be a red flag for the longevity of your relationship. Your relationship is probably going to have a poor chance of survival if you guys are majorly different in certain ways. So that's why I consider this a red flag. If one of you wants kids and the other doesn't, that's a red flag that this relationship may reach a breaking point if one of you is not willing to change your point of view. Same thing if there are major religious differences between the two of you. A lot of people would consider that a red flag just because it's so important for them to find someone who has those same religious values. The relationship won't survive. They might not even give that relationship a chance. It strikes them as a red flag if somebody is too different from them. If your partner wants to live geographically in a very different area than you do, that could be a red flag. So that type of red flag is a little more loosey-goosey. It's a different type of red flag than like abuse is. But it's something where if you start to see those signs in your relationship of like, whoa, we're on extreme, like we're not even on different pages, we're in different books with certain things, it can be a red flag because, like I said, the relationship's chances of survival are probably not very good if you guys don't eventually figure out how to compromise or find some middle ground here. And it's hard to do that if you are in very different places with certain matters. So I would also consider that a red flag. Know what those things are for yourself, but it can be a red flag if you and the person you're with are just two very different people in certain regards. All right, so moving on to flaws. So the quite simple definition that I would give for a flaw is it's an imperfection. And like I said at the beginning of the video, we all have them. None of us are perfect people. We all have things that we could improve on in our lives. What's important though to notice about flaws is that flaws are very subjective. So you may look at someone and think that they have a flaw or something that they need to work on. Someone else might look at that same person and go, I don't view that as a flaw. So flaws really say quite a bit about us and who we are. And the reality is that when we are seeing flaws in other people, it comes from a place of judgment. There's no other way to put it. We're looking at that person and we're going, oh, I see this thing in you that I think is imperfect, that I think you need to work on, that I view as a problem or an issue. And that comes from us, our backgrounds, the values that we hold, the ideas that we were raised with for why we view that thing as a flaw. So flaws are really subjective, and that's an important thing to remember as we're looking at them. So pretty much anything in a relationship could be a flaw. I mean, to be really frank about it, you could view it as a flaw that your partner leaves the dishes in the sink overnight. It could be a flaw that your partner doesn't pick their socks up off the floor. It could be a flaw that one of you likes to stay home more than the other does. It could be a flaw that one of you runs late. I mean, there could be so many different things that could be viewed as flaws. If you really look at your partner, you can probably make a solid list of all the flaws that you think they have. There are many of them. So how do relationships work when we both have these flaws? The two people in the relationship are not perfect people. Well, it really works by one or both of these things that I'm about to name being present. The first is that one person says, I can live with this. Like, yes, I see this flaw, but guess what? I can live with it. Even if it annoys me, even if I don't like it, I can live with it because there are so many more pros than cons in this relationship. And I see so many more things about this person that I love that outweigh the flaws that I also see in this person. So that's the first ingredient. The second ingredient is the person who holds the flaw, so to speak, being willing to work on it. So let's say the flaw is running late. Let's say there's one person in the relationship who really likes to be on time and there's another who runs late. So the person who is the on-time person says to the running late person, hey, I really would appreciate it if you make more of an effort to be on time. This is something that's really important to me and it really bothers me when you're late. Can you please try to work on that? And the second ingredient here is that person saying, yes, I will work on that. So the second thing is that one person in the relationship is willing to work on their flaw. When we become aware of our flaws, and especially when we realize that, oh, this person that I'm in a relationship with and that I love, they have an issue with this. Even if, let's say, nobody else has ever had an issue with the fact that I run late, or nobody else in my life has ever said a word about the fact that I leave my socks all over the floor. Oh, but this person I love, they have an issue with it. So I'm going to try to work on it. And if you actively do that, if you're actively working on your flaws and if your partner sees that, then the relationship is going to be okay, more or less. That's a very simplistic way to put it. But if one or both of those things are present, with one person saying, I can live with this, it's not a big deal, or the other person going, oh, I see that this actually is a big deal to you, and I'm going to work on it. I'm going to do my best to make this thing better and to improve on this flaw, then the relationship will be okay. The relationship gets into trouble when someone says, I can't live with this thing anymore. I can't live with this flaw. And or the other person says, well, I don't care that you don't like it. I'm not changing. Too bad for you. When either of those things become present, the relationship could get into trouble. But flaws can definitely be worked with. So I think that's also important to just mention real quick before I wrap up this video, that going back to the addiction red flag that I mentioned, addiction can cross over from being a red flag to simply being a flaw if somebody is working on it, because it meets one of those two criteria that I mentioned, of one person saying, okay, I'm going to work on this for myself and actively taking steps to do so. All right, so if you have a question for me, email it to nextchapter.michelle@gmail.com. I'll be back next week with another video.